Head Start has launched something called the Head Start Hub, which is an alliance between Head Start and the top innovation centers in the country. So we have, AIC SMU, AIC Nalanda, AIC MUJ, and we have in total 12 AICs with us today. And all these startups are from one of those Head Start hubs. So yeah, I will welcome everybody in the audience as well, and I welcome Veda as well. So for those of you, I'm sure like he needs no introduction, but he's the SME and startup business head for Razorpay, and he wear multiple hats. He not just heads the SME department in Razorpay, but he has also helped and grown multiple digital products and brands across health tech, ed tech, and online travel. So a very relevant. I'm sure we're going to have a very relevant conversation today in our session, because a lot of our startups here fall under that category, and uh, and he's not just built so many brands, but he has also consulted a lot of early stage startups through incubators and directly as well. He also conducts a lot of programs and is a visiting faculty in IIM Bangalore, IIM Indore, SP Jain, IIM Kashipur, and so on and so forth. So, I mean, I can go on and on with his introduction, but I think I'll just, hand over the stage to him, and I'm sure, within the next hour, an hour and a half, we'll get to learn a lot. So I would encourage everyone to, keep their questions handy. You can keep them in the chat, or we can take them in the end, howsoever Veda wants it to be.
Yeah, thank you so much, Vanya, and thanks for having me over. A big thank you to the Head Start Foundation as well. And a big hello to all of the participants who've turned up here. And thank you once again for deciding to spend, an hour and a half of your weekend, in this conversation. I hope all of you are doing safe. All of you are, safe and sound. Your loved ones are safe and sound. Your family is safe and sound. Your employees, your co-workers, everybody is safe and sound. We live in pretty unprecedented, crazy times, but I hope all of you are doing well. As Vanya mentioned, I take care of the startup and the SME practice at Razorpay, marketing and sales. I also serve as a visiting faculty member at a few B schools and a marketing mentor, working with various Thai chapters, Atal Innovation Mission with the Government of India, etc. Very excited to be here once again. Let me just take a moment to share my screen. Give me a moment. Cool. So what we can do in terms of structure is, I have some material which I thought we could use for a discussion, which will take possibly around 45 minutes to an hour, and then we can leave the last half an hour for Q&A. As and when you have questions, my suggestion is you keep putting it in the chat window or in the Q&A box, whatever works for you. Or you could, at the end of an hour, speak up and ask your question. Either way works. Does that work, Vanya, in terms of structure?
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. So over the next hour or so, this is what I have planned. One is we will start off by looking at essentially addressing the T-Rex in the room, which essentially is the pandemic itself. We'll talk about, what has been the kind of changes to the digital ecosystem and to the startup ecosystem the pandemic has actually brought about. In India, and I'm not going to bore you with some of, the well-known data points of how India is one of the world's fastest growing digital economies, one of the world's largest, etc. But a couple of very interesting digital inflection points, which kind of slipped below the radar. Nobody actually noticed it, but that's something that we would be double clicking on, and also understanding the implications of those inflection points on for digital entrepreneurs, for startups, and for mobile marketers, digital marketers. And then one of the advantages of being at Razorpay is that it gives you a vantage position to have a ringside perspective of what's happening across a startup ecosystem. So I'll just give you a quick sneak peek into what have been some of the winds of change that we at Razorpay have actually had an opportunity to observe when it comes to the startup ecosystem. I'll take you through that. And then what we would do is it'll be a presentation of two parts, so to speak. We will look at, to begin with, one of the primary focus areas for a marketer, which essentially is on acquisition, right? New customer acquisition. So from a new customer acquisition perspective, we'll try to double click and understand some best practices and essentially focus on the nub of the issue. One of the fundamental consistent questions that I'm often asked across all my interactions with startup founders, entrepreneurs, SMEs is, all of this is fine. All of this gyan is fine. I understand various aspects of digital marketing, but tell me, for my dhanda, what needs to be the number one priority for my business. What needs to be the number one focus? I don't have infinite resources. I have limited bandwidth, limited money, limited people. You tell me what needs to be my number one focus. So I will give you some simple rules of thumb on the basis of which you can make these kinds of everyday decisions for your business. We'll then look at a couple of different case studies. To begin with, we look at a case study. I used to lead marketing for a company called Healthify Me, and I'll give you a sense of what were some of the best practices that we did from a mobile marketing and a digital marketing perspective there, which helped us grow. And then we'll shift tracks. We look at the second key ownership area from a marketing perspective, which essentially is on engagement. So from an engagement perspective, lead engagement, customer engagement perspective, what are some other best practices? Then I'll give you some examples from my experiences at Simplilearn, in terms of what were some of the things that we did. We'll talk about towards the end a couple of different bonus features. One essentially is on driving repeat business, which is a topic which is very close to my heart. And I'll talk to you about a small failure caselet and a success caselet there. I did believe it back then, believe it more so even now, that we learn a lot more from our failures than we do from our successes. So that's something that we will be looking at. And towards the end, we'll also look at the various ways and means by which your brand can actually create exposure for itself. We'll talk about three at the most philosophical level possible. There are three high-level ways in which you can create exposure, brand exposure for your business, for your brand in the digital ecosystem. We'll look at all three and how the first two are more popular, especially with Indian startups. The third one, not so much, but catching on off late. But we look at what all of these three are. Yeah, we're going to cover this over the next hour or so, and then we'll dive into Q&A. To begin with, some very interesting digital inflection points that I think are worth discussing. The first one was this. In India, the term search and the term Google search are almost synonymous, right? So Google has an almost complete monopoly of the market, unlike a few other developed markets where at least some of the market share is left to some of its competitors. But in India, it's a complete and a total one-sided show, right? Google has a complete monopoly of the market. And till the year 2020, Google search via the browser web was the number one, numero uno, logical entry point for Indians who are looking to discover the internet, www, the World Wide Web. That changed in the year 2020 when Google search via the Play Store, via the App Store, became the number one logical entry point for Indians to discover the internet. Yeah, which was the first step that they were taking before actually going onto the internet, which has some pretty fundamental implications for all of you who are digital entrepreneurs. It means that if you're looking to build a digital brand presence, then the mobile app needs to be the front, middle, and center of your digital brand presence building strategy. The other point, which is also interesting, is that it also has a lot of implications for digital marketers. It means that mobile marketing needs to be the fulcrum of your digital marketing strategy. The second inflection point, which is also interesting, is this. What you see here are the various phases in the brand's evolutionary life cycle journey, right? That a brand actually goes through in the prospect psyche, right? Wherein a brand moves from awareness, where awareness or knowledge about the brand is first of all seeded. Then it moves into consideration, where let's say Vanya is looking to, purchase a payment gateway. She begins to, first of all, awareness about a brand called Razorpay is seated in her mind. Then she begins to consider Razorpay along with a few other brands as her potential payment gateway partners. Then she, from that long list which she's considering, she moves that into a short list of brands which she's very close to making a decision on, the evaluation shortlist, before she makes the final act of purchase. Now, despite the huge growth of digital in the country over the last several years, over the last decade, this very popular symbol, right, the television set, the good old-fashioned television set, that was the number one reach building mechanism, right, when it came to building mass awareness in the country. That changed in the year 2020 when this television set, very popular television set, actually moved a step further down in the life cycle, and it became more of a brand reinforcement channel. And all of these popular digital platforms, which need no introduction, YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook, they became the number one reach building mechanisms. Again, pointing to the kind of growth that the digital ecosystem has seen in the country. Now, let's look at what has been the impact of the pandemic itself on the startup ecosystem in the country. At Razorpay, we've been observing these changes across both the inward money movement cycle, where businesses receive funds from their end customers through our suite of payment gateway, payment link, payment page products, and the outward money movement cycle, where businesses are paying out funds through our suite of neo-banking business banking solution, which is the Razorpay X platform, wherein they pay out funds to their vendor partners, raw material suppliers, employee payroll, etc. We've noticed a huge boom of obviously e-commerce, but we've also seen a lot of entrepreneurs come up in edtech and health tech, which is intuitive enough because people are stuck at home, end customers are stuck at home, and they want to discover ways and means to upskill themselves, which explains the growth of edtech. People are stuck at home and they're looking for ways and means to discover healthier and fitter versions of themselves, which explains the growth of health, which explains the growth of health tech. And the other interesting trend that we've been observing is that we've been seeing a lot of growth, a lot of entrepreneurs, startups, SMEs come up from tier 2, tier 3 and below. So it's not just about Bangalore, Mumbai, Delhi, Chennai, Hyderabad, Calcutta. It's about, a lot of people coming on board from tier 2, tier 3 and below, which is very, very interesting and heartening. And a lot of focus on local vernacular. More than half of Razorpay's startup sales teams conversations are not in English today. They are essentially in local vernacular. So SMEs and startups are a lot more, while they understand English, they are a lot more comfortable in local vernacular. And we're not just observing greater volumes of SMEs. It's almost been like we've been sitting inside of a time capsule, right? The kind of growth that the digital ecosystem has seen in the last 1 year has been the equivalent of what might have happened over a 5-year horizon, if not for the pandemic. And it's like we've been sitting inside a time capsule and just woken up 5 years down the line. And that's how it's been. And we're not just seeing a huge increase in the volume, the sheer volume of businesses gravitating towards digital, but we've also seen a huge growth of the absolute monies that each of these businesses actually pull through the Razorpay ecosystem, again, attesting to strong product market fit. All of these headwinds across both the inward money movement cycle and the outward money movement cycle for businesses, where they receive funds from customers and pay out funds as well for employee payroll, raw materials, etc. Very encouraging signs as we look ahead, to the next 12, 24, 36 months for both the startup ecosystem and the digital ecosystem in the country. Moving on, the pandemic, as I said, has brought digital to the forefront, and I've given you a bunch of different data points which attest to the statement. It's brought digital to the forefront like never before in the country, and a lot of startups, unfortunately, still need a lot of help in navigating this digital jigsaw puzzle. They need help with engagement, with nurturing. I was reading the statistic recently that India's SME and startup ecosystem has a huge middle order problem. It's not just the cricket team, Indian cricket team, which has a middle order problem, but it's also India's startup and SME ecosystem. Because in all other developed markets, we've got a healthy distribution of SMEs and startups, which are fairly small, which are medium sized, and which eventually grow into larger sizes. You've got a distribution. Whereas in India, you've got a few startups, you've got a lot of startups which are very small. You've got very few startups which actually make it, which actually achieve PMF and achieve scale, which go beyond the middle order and then eventually achieve scale. And there is this huge drop off that happens in the middle because they lack the kind of support ecosystem to be able to engage, to be able to nurture, to be able to handhold them across their growth journey. And one of the consistent points of feedback, that's something I mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, which I often hear from a lot of startups, is that I need help with prioritization for my business. I understand various aspects of digital, but help me prioritize. I know what SEM means. I know what SEO means. I know what LinkedIn and Facebook stand for. I know I can run ads there, but tell me for my dhanda, right? I sell saris online. I sell mental wellness classes online. For my dhanda, I am an edtech company which sells to schools. What needs to be my number one priority? I'm sure most of you here, know what each of these terms are, but let me just spend 30 seconds in giving you a quick crash course. Let's say, Bania is looking to plan a holiday in Ladakh. Yeah. Let's assume there is no pandemic, there is no lockdown situation in the country, and she wants to travel to Ladakh for a holiday. And she searches for resorts in Ladakh. Yeah. Resorts in Leh, for example. Now, every time somebody enters something on the Google search bar and presses enter, there is a virtual real-time auction that happens. Very similar to an auction in the real world. Let's say I'm looking to auction this OnePlus phone. You've got various people bidding various rates for that particular phone, right? In this particular case, it is a virtual auction where you've got various advertisers bidding for the right to serve their ad as the first for that particular keyword, which in this case is resorts in Leh, Ladakh. Yeah. So let's say that hypothetically, Make My Trip has bid $200 and Booking.com has bid $300 for that particular keyword. Now, for the most part, whose ad comes up first is determined by who bids the highest. There are a few other factors that determine it, but for the most part, it is influenced by money. Who has bid the highest? In this particular case, given that Booking.com has bid the highest, their ad comes up on top. So in the search results, Vanya would see booking.com followed by Make My Trip. Both of them would have the ad tag listed against them. If Vanya were to click on the booking.com ad, booking.com would be charged $300 by Google, which was their bid price, right? This is called CPC, cost per click advertising. And all of the efforts that you as an entrepreneur, as a marketer undertake to run these kinds of Google search advertisements is referred to as SEM, search engine marketing, which is what I've written here. And your Google provides a platform called Google AdWords, using which you can run a lot of these SEM ads. Now, Vanya were to scroll a little further down in the search results bar, she would see a bunch of listings which do not have the ad tag listed against them, right? These are called organic listings. And these are based purely on merit. They've got nothing to do with who has the most money. And if Vanya were to click on any of these listings, the brand would not be charged any money. This is based by Google's organic search rankings algorithms determination of whose website or landing page's content is the most relevant for the user's query, is the freshest content which has been updated regularly, which is the page that has the best user experience, the best UX, which is the page that has the maximum number of backlinks from other authoritative domain sources, based on a variety of different variables that go into the eventual decision. Google makes a final determination. Now, all of the efforts that you as an entrepreneur, as a marketer undertake to make sure that your website, your landing page has a chance to bubble up higher and higher in Google's organic search ranking algorithm is referred to as SEO, search engine optimization. Now, of course, Facebook and LinkedIn advertising needs no introduction. Just on SEO alone, I want to give you a sense. I want to just give you a couple of examples that underscore the kind of impact that SEO can make. I'm sure most of you would have, some of you might have at least heard of the name Thrilophilia, right? At one point, it happened to be, one of India's, fairly popular travel planning destination. And it was a bootstrap company. It had raised a very, very small seed round of angel funding, etc. But for the most part, it was bootstrapped. And it was competing against, and travel tech, as most of you would know, at least pre-pandemic, was extremely competitive, right? You had a lot of multinational biggies, right? IBIBO Group, Booking.com, etc. in the country, Airbnb. Plus, you also had a lot of homegrown, well-funded, deep-pocketed, VC-funded startups, right? You had Make My Trip, ClearTrip, Oyo, you had Stayzilla, all of these different players coming in. And Thrilophilia, because they had no money, they focused only on SEO. They did only SEO. They did a fantastic job of SEO. They had a really good team, and they used to beat everybody else when it came to organic ranking. They never used to spend $1 in marketing or ₹1 in marketing. Forget about SEM. They only used to do SEO, and they had like single-minded, razor-sharp focus there. And they used to beat every single large brand with much deeper pockets, which essentially gives you a sense of the kind of power that SEO brings to the table. And the other example that I want to give you, which underscores the power of SEO, is Practo. I'm sure everybody here, I don't think there's a person in the room who's not heard of Practo. It's India's largest doctor marketplace and doctors and hospital marketplace. And they get around 25-30 million hits a month, their website, visits a month. That's their monthly traffic. 90% of that is through SEO, is through organic efforts. They don't pay for it. They don't pay for almost 22.5 million out of their 25 million visits every single month, because they've had obviously a first mover advantage, and they've done such a fantastic job of SEO. They've got a fantastic team which focuses only on SEO, and it's only 10% of their traffic which essentially comes through other paid efforts, which is a great thing. So, for example, just to give you a sense, if Vanya is a gynecologist who's a very popular gynecologist in Delhi, in South Delhi, for example, and she has her own website as well. She has her own practice. I can go to her website and book an appointment. But let's say that I search for Dr. Vanya, her website won't come up first. I will actually see, and let's say she's also listed on Practo. Her listing on Practo will actually come up higher than Dr. Vanya's own website, which essentially gives you a sense of the kind of fantastic job that they have done from an SEO perspective. I just wanted to give you these two examples to underscore how scalable businesses can be built over time just by leveraging the power of content and just by focusing on SEO. Yeah, I just wanted to leave you with that thought. Now, coming back to the problem at hand, Vanya as an entrepreneur, she understands all of this. All of this is fine, and she tells me, Veda, all of this gyan is fine, but tell me, for my dhanda, for my business, मैं कैसे prioritize करूं? How do I prioritize for my business what I need to focus on? I'm not Amazon, I'm not Flipkart, I don't have infinite people, I don't have infinite money. I need to know what needs to be my P0, number one priority. Now I'm going to give you some simple frameworks using which you can make this kind of a decision in your life as an entrepreneur. Now, the first question Vanya needs to ask herself in an attempt to answer this prioritization question is this. She asks herself, the category or the space that I am operating in, is that mass or is that niche? That's the first question. Now she can answer this question in a couple of different ways. One is, as an entrepreneur, she has a gut-based instinct, which essentially suggests that the category she's operating in is mass, right? She sells saris online and possibly mass. No, listen, I sell mental wellness courses online and probably niche, right? It's the entrepreneur's gut-based subjective instinct. Now, what she can also do is she can have objectivity and a data-backed way to actually validate whether her hypothesis is right or wrong. So what she can do is she can open up Google AdWords, and within Google AdWords, there is a tool which is provided called the Keyword Planner, which essentially gives you a sense of the kind of keyword search demand volume that is there every single month in your target market. Let's assume that's India. So what you would do is you would open up the Google Keyword Planner and figure out how many searches are actually happening for mental wellness classes online. Let's say that's a space she's operating in India. Now, it's not a perfect science. It is part art, and it's not a binary. It is a grayscale and a spectrum. But if the search volume for a country which has the kind of internet population that India has, if your target market is India, if your monthly search volume is less than 15-20,000 searches a month, then you can assume that the category you're operating in to be niche. If it is more than that, you can assume it to be mass. Now, what happens if you're mass? Now, if you're mass, you need to make Google your number one priority, combination of SEM and SEO. Why is that? Because it's common sense. That is this old cliche, right? Be where your customers are. That essentially is what we're doing. Not all of us can be Google or Amazon, and we can't build new user behavior. But what we can very well do is we can piggyback on existing user demand patterns and existing user behavior patterns. There are already multiple thousands of people searching for keywords related to my category, related to my business already on Google. It makes sense for me to be there. As part of that user's moment of truth, I can make sure that I can insert my brand into that conversation. So make Google my number one priority if I'm already mass. What happens if I'm not so lucky, right? Vanya tells me this. I'm niche, right? I sell mental wellness courses online. What do I do? So you don't directly run into Facebook's arms, but you ask yourself an additional question. I'm niche, yes, but am I high on personal connect? Does my brand, the nature of my brand, the nature of my category in which I operate in, does it give me the opportunity to strike a very strong personal connect with my customers? And can I inject a strong visual element in my marketing communication? Let me give you an example. When I first joined Healthify Me, for those of you who haven't heard of Healthify Me today is India's largest health and fitness mobile application, more than 25 million users. And it is a freemium app, right? Which means some of it is free, some of it is premium, free plus premium, freemium. The free aspect involves a calorie counting service. So it has the world's largest database of Indian foods that are mapped to accurate calorie breakdowns. So let's say Vanya has had a plate of aloo paratha for breakfast, or it could be some exotic cuisine from the remotest corners of India, Mizoram, Assam, Kashmir, Daman and Diu, Lakshadweep, Andaman, Kanyakumari, it doesn't matter. All of those are mapped. So she gets to know how many calories she's consumed, carbs, vitamins, proteins, minerals. And then she's done a set of Surya Namaskars today morning. She gets to know how many calories she's burned, and she keeps logging all her water intake. So it makes Vanya a lot more mindful of her eating habits, her drinking habits, and her workout patterns. So that is available for free. It's like a daily diary, right? It's just a calorie counting service. The premium service involves creating personalized diet, fitness, and yoga plans for users who want to, get healthier. Right? Some people want to lose weight, some people want to gain muscle, some people want to just gain strength and flexibility, some people want to overcome hypertension, diabetes, whatever their health goals are. It helps them do that through personalized plans. Now, it's operating in the space of weight loss for the most part. And when I first joined Healthify Me, I had a huge culture shock because Facebook was the number one dhanda driver there. It was the number one breadwinner when it came to driving ROI. And it wasn't Google. In all of my previous experiences that I had worked, it was always Google search, which was the number one dhanda driver. But in this particular case, it was Facebook, which I found particularly intriguing. And it was a huge shock for me when I first joined. And turns out the reason was Healthify Me operates in the space of weight loss. It enables people to lose weight in most cases and discover healthier and fitter versions of themselves. It enables a 40-something middle-aged working professional to lose that beer belly, to overcome hypertension, diabetes, which has come about due to a sedentary lifestyle, and thereby win their life back. It enables a 30-something young mother who's put on a lot of post-pregnancy baby fat to actually lose that and rediscover her confidence. It enables a 20-something young man to muzzle up and get a six-pack ab, yeah, and look really good before Valentine's Day. So it's very, very high on personal connect, and it's so weight loss and health and fitness is as close to the identity, the personal identity of an individual as it can get. Plus, as a brand, all of the communication that we did was video led, testimonial led, customer testimonial led, and all of this were customers coming forward and having authentic retellings of the kind of life transformations that they had seen before and after using Healthify Me. So it's all video led, very strong customer empathy, testimonial led communication. All of this does really well on Facebook. Strong personal connect does really well on Facebook. So if you're operating in a category like this, which is proactive health tech, the kind of space that a Healthify Me, a Cult Fit operate in, or if you're operating in fashion tech, right? Nykaa, Myntra, right? Which are again very involved purchases, looking good, right? People want to look good. And that again is very close to the identity of an individual. You can strike a very strong personal connect as a brand. In such cases, Facebook would work really well. Of course, if you're operating in the B2B space and your primary decision maker in your target customer, in your target market, in your target companies is also on LinkedIn, you can make LinkedIn your number one choice. For example, at Healthify Me, again, we used to sell corporate wellness programs, employee engagement programs to a lot of large marquee corporate brand names in the country, the Tatas, Reliance, McKinsey, Infosys, Cognizant, TCS, etc. Large names, right? And the primary decision maker for us was essentially CHROs, chief HR operating officers, and or directors of HR and above, or CXOs, even if they were outside of HR, who had the ability to influence these decisions. So we targeted them on LinkedIn, and all of these guys are on LinkedIn, right? But for example, not in all cases can LinkedIn work just because you're in B2B. For example, if you're in a tech company targeting schools, not a lot of school principals are there on LinkedIn. So for you, LinkedIn may not really work. In fact, digital may not even be the answer in such cases. You might be better off having an event-led, high-touch acquisition approach, plus, of course, channel partnerships. Plus, of course, you could still use LinkedIn if you are targeting working professionals, white-collar working professionals. At Simplilearn, we used to use LinkedIn heavily because we targeted white-collar working professionals like you and me, and who are very, very active on LinkedIn. Now, what happens if you're not that lucky? We looked at two scenarios. One, if your mass, make Google your priority. If you're niche and high on personal connect, make Facebook your priority. If your target, if you're B2B and your target company decision makers are active on LinkedIn, make LinkedIn your focus. What happens if you're not that lucky? You're niche and you're low on personal connect. What do? It's a double whammy, right? Not only are enough people, you don't have enough people searching for your brand on Google, plus the nature of your category is such that it's not high on personal connect. Example here, Razorpay. We operate right in this category. We are a B2B payments company. We are a unicorn, yes. We are India's largest, yes. But we're not in the peer-to-peer payment space. We're not a Google Pay. We're not a Phone Pay, right? We're a B2B payments company. So we are still niche. There are not too many people who are searching for keywords related to our category, payment gateway, payment links, etc. There are a lot of people, of course, but not as much as B2C. We are still a B2B payment company. We sell to SMEs and startups just like you. But let's face it, right? An entrepreneur, who's our target customer? People like you, right? Entrepreneurs, founders of startups, SMEs, etc. They don't wake up in the morning and get excited about the fact that they're going to use a payment gateway today, right? Let's be honest about it. And that's just the nature of the category itself. There's no point in taking it personally. The nature of the category we operate in, which is B2B payments, is not high on personal connect. It's not like weight loss, for example. So then what do you do? So at Razorpay, I have a twin problem now. I don't have enough people searching for me on Google. Plus, as a brand, the nature of my category is such, I can't strike a very strong personal connect with my end customer. So what do I do? So in this particular case, what I do is I focus on SEO a lot, and I focus not just on those keywords which are relevant to my business, like payment gateway, B2B payments, etc., but also on, because I need to do that, of course, because it's relevant for my business, but I don't have enough people searching for those keywords because I'm operating in a niche space. But I also focus on those keywords which have a much higher keyword search volume pattern out there, which may not be immediately relevant to my dhanda, to my business, but still relevant to my target persona, which is the entrepreneur. So at Razorpay, we create content around how do you use digital marketing to grow your business? How do you use growth hacking to grow your business as a first-time entrepreneur, which is in the space of digital literacy. Second space is financial literacy. How do I read a P&L and a balance sheet? A lot of first-time entrepreneurs don't know this. A lot of first-time entrepreneurs have questions on GST. They don't understand GST. How do you navigate the GST compliance maze? We create content around all of this. What is the relevance for all of these pieces to Razorpay's business? Not much. but these have much higher keyword demand volumes than just payment gateway. What is the relevance for these keyword pools for my target customer? A lot, which is the entrepreneur. They need this a lot. So it gives my brand, the Razorpay's brand, an opportunity to gain access to a larger volume of eyeballs, a larger prospect universe, and the brand has an opportunity to inject itself into that narrative, and essentially attract these leads into the funnel, and over time engage and nurture them and convert them into paying customers. In summary, if you're mass, Google. If you're niche, high on Personal Connect, Facebook. If you're B2B and your the key decision makers in your target companies are on LinkedIn, make LinkedIn your focus. If you're niche and low on Personal Connect, you focus on not just keywords related to your business, but also slightly tangential neighboring keywords, which have much higher keyword demand volumes, which may not be immediately and directly relevant to your business, but extremely relevant to your target customer persona. Yeah. Moving on, let's try and understand and decipher, the various elements that went into Healthify Me's mobile marketing jigsaw puzzle. Yeah. The key elements in our mobile marketing recipe, number one was Facebook, for the reasons that I mentioned earlier, right? High empathy, strong personal connect. Facebook worked really well. And we also did Google, something called as Google UAC campaigns, Universal App Campaigns. Now, when UAC campaigns were first launched back in 2016, 2017, people hated it. UAC campaigns today are literally the only way in which you can run app install campaigns via Google. When UAC was first launched, people hated it because advertisers had to give up control. And advertisers were used to having a lot of control with regards to targeting, when they were running ads via Google, and people hated UAC campaigns. And because in UAC, you essentially had to say, in Google Baba, we trust. You had to give Google your Play Store listing, your iTunes listing of your app, your creatives, your landing pages, etc. And Google would decide whom to target, when to target, and with what communication. You could define the overall sandbox. You could tell Google that you need to run ads only in India, for example, but beyond that, you had limited control, and people hated it. And at Razorpay as well, when we first started using UAC campaigns, it was a distant second. There was daylight between Google, UAC, and Facebook, with regards to ROI. But what we did was we persisted with it. And we did a really good job of, instrumenting the Google Pixel, so to speak, which essentially is a piece of JavaScript code, which you can embed in your app or your website's, front-end code. And that essentially runs or fires data at various points back into the Google ecosystem. Now, let's try to understand that with a simplified example. Vanya, I apologize. I'm going to take your name again. You're the only person I know in the audience today. So let's say that Vanya has installed the Healthify Me app, and she's just completed her registration on the app. And now that essentially is an upstream event that she has just completed in her life cycle of engagement with the app. Now the Google Pixel fires at that point, and it sends back completely anonymized and aggregated information containing no personally identifiable information of Vanya. It doesn't send Vanya's name, her phone number, her email ID, etc. Right? It sends anonymized, aggregated information of Vanya back into the Google ecosystem. Right? And Google has a machine learning algorithm, and machine learning and AI, artificial intelligence, are much abused words, but they actually do have this in reality. In this case, they essentially go try and find more clones of Vanya. Now, Vanya continues to engage with Healthify Me, right? She continues to spend time on the app. She continues to log her breakfast, her lunch. She's had a Gujarati thali for lunch. She's logged that. She continues to, her workout pattern. She's gone for a 5-kilometer jog. She's logged that as well. Now, this is a midstream event. I send this information back into Google. She eventually purchases maybe a 6-month yoga plan. Yeah. And this information again is sent back into Google. Now, what I tell Google is, Google, listen, I like Vanya. Go find me 100 more clones of Vanya. Right. So what Google does is essentially it looks at those people who have the same digital kundali, so to speak, or who exhibit the same kind of digital browsing behavior or have the same kind of digital footprints as Vanya does, and it tries to get them in, right? That essentially is what Google does. Now, Google's algorithms ability and its accuracy at finding more clones of this Vanya would be limited to begin with, because it has a very small data set to play with. It has data of just one Vanya. Now, over time, if you continue to persist with this, and if I can supply Google with data of 100 Vanyas and ask it to find the next 10,000 Vanyas for me, it'll be able to do a better job. And that's what we did at Healthify Me, because we stuck to the Google USC campaigns. And as we kept supplying more and more data into the Google ecosystem, into the Google network, Google was able to find us, better quality customers, better quality prospects who started becoming paying customers. And this is what I like to think of as inside out targeting, the new way of targeting using digital. The traditional form of customer targeting is outside, and wherein you as an entrepreneur decide, sitting in your tower, that this is your target customer, and you try to go after that. In this particular case, you're letting data and user behavior on your mobile app, on your website, actually tell you who your ideal customer persona is, either validate some hypotheses and assumptions that you already have, or challenge some of the hypotheses and assumptions that you might already have. And this is what I think of as inside out targeting, because it is user behavior in your application that is actually determining who your ideal customer persona is. We also did a really good job of ASO, also referred to as App Store optimization, which you can think of as SEO, search engine optimization's cousin, but for the app ecosystem. So this makes sure that your apps listing comes up, organic listing on the Play Store, on the iTunes Store, comes up for relevant keyword search queries on the Play Store, on the iTunes Store. And because we've done such a fantastic job of ASO, even during quarters and months when marketing dollars were hard to come by, we were still able to not lose scale. And that was a really good thing. We did a really good job of in-app marketing. We used to create something called as a blended lead score that helped, which was essentially a number on a score of 0 to 100. Higher the number, greater their probability of purchase, greater that prospect's probability of purchasing a paid plan with Healthify. And we used to create this number by looking at a number of different demographic and behavioral variables. For example, I know that somebody who's using an iPhone has a better chance of conversion using historical data than somebody who's using an Android phone on the Healthify app. I know that somebody who is coming from a tier 1 city, like a Mumbai or a Bangalore, they convert better than somebody coming in from a Surat or a Coimbatore. I know that somebody who has a pre-existing lifestyle condition, like a hypertension or a diabetes, they convert better than those who don't. So using data points and signals like these, what we managed to do was we used to have a lot of in-app marketing hooks, which we targeted for our high conversion probability customer cohorts. And that was something that we did really well. And we used to target them with, notifications that asked them for, are you interested in a 7-day free trial? Are you interested in a free 1-hour diet consultation with our top nutritionist, no strings attached? And that was something that we did to essentially engage, handhold these customers across their engagement lifecycle with the Healthify platform. Email marketing, we did a lot of that. More on that when we get into the Simply Learn, case study. And we also did a really good job of accelerated mobile pages, which essentially is a simple code tweak that you need to make to your M site, to your mobile website, to make sure that your page loads really quickly. And it's very important from a mobile SEO perspective. If you want to start ranking higher and higher on mobile search results, this is extremely important for you to implement. Now, so far, we've been looking at customer acquisition. What are some of the best practices for you to follow in the digital ecosystem from an acquisition perspective? Now we're going to shift tracks and look at things from an engagement and nurture perspective. What are the things for you to focus on? Engagement and nurturing is about working with prospects who have already entered your pipeline, who have already entered your marketing funnel. What's your marketing funnel, right? You have traffic on top, you've got leads in the middle, and you've got paying customers at the bottom. We call it a funnel for a reason, because you have people dropping off at various points. Now, what do you do to make sure that your funnel is not very narrow, but it is as broad as it can be, which means that drop-offs are minimized? How do you monetize people who have already entered your funnel, who already have some kind of affinity on your brand? How do you make sure that you're able to convert them into paying customers? That's what engagement and nurturing is about. In some cases, it's also about driving repeat customers and repeat revenues from your existing customers. That's also something you can use engagement and nurture for. Let's look at some best practices. I'm going to give you a sense of what we used to do at Simply Learn. Let's try and understand this again with a simple example. Let's take Vania's case again. And let's say that Vania comes and she's interested in learning digital marketing. Simply Learn, by the way, for those of you who don't know, it's one of the world's largest edtech platforms, conducts courses on a variety of topics: digital marketing, data science, iOS, Android programming, etc., project management, and so on. Let's say Vania is interested in learning digital marketing. She comes to the website. She signs up as a lead. She signs up. She gives her details in the inquiry form, lead form. Now, at first, she's hit with a communication across email, SMS, WhatsApp, browser notification that says, "Welcome, Vania. Congratulations on having taken the first step in building a career in digital marketing." Yeah. A few days after that, she gets a notification that says, Here are some of the latest and greatest blogs, Vanya, on digital marketing. She gets a sense of that. And a few days after that, Vanya gets another, communication that says, here are testimonials of people just like you, Vanya, who've actually advanced in their careers, who've got salary hikes, promotions after having taken this course. Yeah, a few days after that, Vanya gets an invitation to a webinar just like this one, conducted by an industry expert, which helps Vanya build a lot of trust and credibility towards the brand. If you noticed, there is nothing salesy so far that Vanya has received. Vanya has received 4 communications from the brand so far. Not even in one of them was there a discount code, a coupon code, or any CTA or a call to action that asked Vanya to buy now. A few days after this, Vanya eventually sees the sales pitch, right? Wherein the brand moves in for the slam dunk. They try to close the sale by asking Vanya, giving Vanya a 20% discount code, which expires in 48 hours, just to build a sense of FOMO, a fear of missing out, so that Vanya becomes a paying customer. Now, what you see here is what is referred to as a classic marketing drip campaign for engagement and nurturing. It's called drip because very similar to water dripping off a tap, one after another. You've got these communications going out one after another. And what the brand, in this case Simplilearn, has successfully done is they've engaged and nurtured the prospect and warmed her up, before actually going in for the sales pitch. If say they had sent a 20% discount code on the first email, it might possibly not have worked. So this is referred to as engagement and nurturing, and this is being done through these drip efforts, which is across channels. It's not just on email. Now, as a marketer, as an entrepreneur, you can essentially automate all of this. Automate saying that this communication needs to go out for this lead on this day. Follow it up 2 days later with this communication across channels. So you can set up these rules through something called as marketing automation platforms. I've given you here a bunch of different brands, which I'm sure all of you have heard of, which are some of the world's leading marketing automation platforms. HubSpot is the world's leader. Acton, Marketo, very popular platforms. Salesforce, of course, I'm sure everybody has heard of it. World's leading CRM tool also has a marketing automation module. And unfortunately, most of these are extremely expensive and unaffordable for early stage bootstrap startups. What I would recommend though is one of these brands closer to home, Active Campaigns, which is a really good one. Freshmarketer and Zoho, of course, and WebEngage, 3 Indian brands. All of these are really good. Engagement and nurturing, how can it really help at the most philosophical level possible? How can it really help your business? There are 2 ways. Like in the Simplilearn case with Vanya, it can help as part of the transaction lifecycle itself in driving conversions, right? That can happen in cases where your sales lifecycle is fairly long. Sales lifecycle is the average time it takes for a prospect to become a paying customer. In Simplilearn's case, we knew, from historical data that a prospect takes on an average 4 weeks, almost a month to become a paying customer. So I know that Vanya is not going to run away anywhere, right? I know that I've got the luxury of time. It's like a test match. I know that I've got time at my disposal. So I can engage and nurture Vanya over her prospect lifecycle with Simplilearn and then convert her into a paying customer. So that's what I did. That's one use case, which I can use when it is a test match, right? In a cricket context, if I were to use a cricket analogy, as part of the transaction lifecycle and converting that prospect into a paying customer. The second one is in terms of driving stickiness and loyalty. Let's say that I don't have the luxury of time. It's not like a test match, it's a T20. My sales lifecycle is, say, 5 minutes, like in Domino's Pizza's case. Vanya is hungry, she wants to order pizza online. She goes to Domino's. Now, Domino's just has a 5-minute time window to play with. It doesn't have the luxury to engage and nurture Vanya during those 5 minutes, right? So as part of the transaction life cycle in Domino's case, or let's say she's looking to book a flight ticket, make my trip, 30-minute time window, right? She's not looking to plan a holiday, elaborate holiday, it's just a flight ticket. So in such cases where the sales life cycle is extremely short, the brand can use engagement and nurturing for driving repeat behavior. In the Domino's Pizza case, Domino's knows that Vanya is a vegetarian. She loves paneer toppings. So after the transaction is done, Domino's keeps sending her information on the latest and greatest pizza toppings, paneer toppings that they have, vegetarian toppings, etc. Now, the next time Vanya wants to order food online, Domino's is top of mind for her, right? And in this case, the brand has successfully managed to use engagement and nurturing for driving repeat behavior and customer stickiness and loyalty. The third one, of course, is refunneling users. This has multiple, manifestations. For example, at Simplilearn, we used to have this concept of dead leads. These were leads that the team had tried their best and given up on. Not because the targeting was wrong, because the timing wasn't right. They were not looking to make a purchase then and there. So 6 months later, we used to make an attempt to actually refunnel them back into the marketing funnel, right? To try and monetize them. At Healthify, for example, we had these hibernating inactive users who have the app on their phones, but they haven't launched it in the last month. So we used to use a lot of live content, Instagram lives, which were streamed live on the app. Where we have a top nutritionist talking about benefits of keto dieting, benefits of vegan dieting, dangers of crash dieting, some popular trendy topics like these, which was a great way. And people used to come in and ask questions as well, which was a great way for me to reactivate hibernating cohort. So Vania has forgotten about the Healthify Me app. It's just lying on the phone. All of a sudden, she gets a push notification that says, "Tune in to listen to this top nutritionist talk about keto diet," for example. Now, Vania feels it's interesting. She's free. She manages to launch the app to watch the Instagram live. Now, that's how I managed to reactivate Vania, right? So engagement and nurturing can also be used for refunneling and reactivating users. Now, I'm sure that you've heard a lot of marketing jargon today, and most of you as startup founders are possibly more comfortable with business terms. So as a CEO, you want this answered in simple terms, right? How do you use, and what is the business benefit of engagement and nurturing? I'll give you two strong reasons for this, two strong advantages of using lead engagement and nurturing. The first is your sales team is going to be a lot happier. And I'll tell you why. Even though this is a marketing play, your sales team is going to be a lot happier. I don't know about all of you in the audience today, but all of the CEOs that I work with, they usually love their sales teams a lot more than marketing, because they look at the sales folks as the people who bring in the money and the marketers as the people who end up spending their hard-earned money. It's not just the salary that they take, but also money that they blow in marketing campaigns. And despite being a marketer myself, I need to admit to that. And if you're going to give the CEO an opportunity, something that says that your sales team is going to be more productive, that's something that the CEOs would love. Here's how it is. Now, let's say that Vania runs a company. It has a 5-member inside sales team, right? Each of whom make 20 calls a day. They work for 20 days a month, which means they can get in touch with approximately around 2,000. They can make 2,000 calls a month. Let's assume, for simplicity's sake, that each of these calls is to a unique prospect. So they can get in touch with 2,000 people in a given month. But that's all the human bandwidth allows, right? But what happens if her pipeline is 10,000 strong? Right? In what basis will the sales team determine which are the top 2,000 to call? That's where the power of technology, the power of marketing automation and engagement and nurturing comes in. Vania can send communications across platforms, email, SMS, WhatsApp, browser notifications to all of these 10,000 folks using marketing automation platforms. And look at the kind of engagement and the behavior that these people exhibit towards these communications. How many people opened my emails? How many people ignored my emails? How many people clicked through on those emails? How many people came to my website, visited my pricing page and dropped off? How many people registered for my webinar? How many people actually showed up for my webinar? Right? Looking at a blended behavioral contribution across all of these different behavioral manifestations, you can then create a blended lead score, very similar to what I had explained in the Healthify Me example earlier. And using that lead score, what you can then do is, which is attached to each of those 10,000 people who are there in your pipeline. Now, all Vania's sales team needs to do is to sort these 10,000 in descending order of lead score and call the top 2,000, which are the most likely to convert. Higher the lead score, higher the probability of conversion. Now, this has two advantages. The first is the sales team is spending time with those people who are really ready to make a purchase. They're not just using a FIFO, a first in, first out, or a last in, first out logic. They're calling leads who are really qualified. They're spending their time more productively, which means their efficiency is more, which means directly the company makes more money, more revenues, enhanced top line. The other advantage, the other byproduct of this is that Vania's team is not getting in touch with the remaining 8,000 people who are not quite ready to make a purchase, and their brand is not being eroded through spam calling these 8,000. Yeah. So two advantages there: increased top line and, of course, no brand erosion. The second critical reason why you need to consider market engagement and nurturing, and I cannot stress this enough, is that a lot of these marketing automation platforms are by a factor of 10,000 more cost effective than cost per click CPC or cost per 1,000 impressions, CPM based platforms for engagement and nurturing, which are provided by Google, Facebook, other remarketing platforms. And because they have a tier based pricing, right? Saying that if you want to send communication to 50,000, if your list size is 50,000 and below, this is your price. You can send as many communications as you want. If your list size is between 50,000 and say 1,000,000, this is your rack rate, etc. Now, which means that for the same marketing spend, you can acquire more number of customers, which means your cost of customer acquisition goes down, which means that you got to spend lesser on marketing, which means your bottom line looks a lot better. So engagement and nurturing, for two strong business reasons you need to consider: one, increase top line, and increase bottom line. A quick pro tip, and this is something that I'm often asked, which is on how long do I continue with engagement and nurture efforts? And this is, again, not a perfect science. You can think of it as a relay race where the marketing team does engagement and nurturing, and they run with the baton for the first 3 quarters of the race before handing off the baton for the home stretch for the last lap to the sales guys to come in and close the sale for the slam dunk. So for around 3 quarters of the sales life cycle duration, you've got your drip campaigns running. And then for the last lap, you've got the sales guys coming in. For example, in the Simplilearn case that I said, like I said, 4 weeks was the average sales life cycle. And we sent drip communication for approximately on 3 weeks, around 18 days, which is what you saw. If you are Infosys, for example, which is a B2B company, where sales life cycles are 12 months, 24 months and above, you might be better off in sending monthly newsletters. It would be stupid to follow the Simplilearn approach and send 4 communications in 18 days. Yeah. And in the Simplilearn case, if I were to send Vanya 5 emails in 2 days, that would have also been silly. That is the other end of the spectrum, right? Vanya would have marked me as spam and unsubscribed. Or if I had sent Vanya monthly newsletters, that would have also been crazy, because Vanya would have probably gone ahead with a competitor, right? So you've got to make sure that you space out your communication. And can I request everybody to go on mute, please? Mr. Prabhas. Yeah. So what I was saying is, where was I? In Vanya's case, I need to make sure that I space out my marketing communication to around 3 quarters of my sales life cycle. So if I'm Infosys, I know my sales life cycles are say 12 months. I might be better off by sending monthly newsletters for say 7 months. And make sure that your frequency cap, you don't overdo your frequency cap. Yeah. Moving on, I'm going to focus on a couple of different topics. The first one, which is very close to my heart, which is on driving repeat business. This is many years ago when I used to take care of product and marketing at what was back then one of India's leading online ethnic wear marketplaces. This was way before Flipkart and Amazon launching their own suite of ethnic wear in India. And it was a good, healthy company. It still is, by the way. And positive EBITDAs, strong gross margins, strong cash flows. And its product market fit and its USP was it used to customize products, langas, saris, kurtis, kurtas, sherwanis, as per the body measurements of the customer. And the primary target group for this particular online marketplace was the Indian diaspora living abroad, NRIs living abroad. And these could be people in Detroit, in London, in Toronto, New Zealand, Australia, anywhere. And the reason they were coming to us was because they lacked high quality Indian tailoring options in their respective places. Whereas in India, of course, you've got a tailor in almost every street. You don't need this. Whereas in overseas, you actually needed this. So we did little to no marketing in India, only SEO, and all of our marketing efforts were focused on the global geographies. And again, a healthy business. But the problem was this: people would buy, and the average selling prices, ASPs, were very high. People would buy a $500, $600 lehenga or a kurti or a kurta or a sherwani for a wedding or for Eid, for a festival like Eid or a Diwali or a Navratri, etc. And they would disappear for 3-4 years, never to come back, which is a big problem. So what ended up happening was, when we went for raising our next round of funds from a lot of VCs, they found the company to be inherently risky because they felt there was no stickiness built into the platform. Customers were not being retained. They were not repeat transacting. So the business was completely and totally dependent and at the mercy of new customer acquisitions. New customers were coming in through one door, transacting once and leaving through the other, never to come back, which is a big problem. So although the company made money, company was cash flow positive, strong gross margin, strong EBITDAs, we never could, we couldn't really raise our next round of funding because a lot of VCs found the company to be inherently risky. While the company is still doing well and it still makes its own money, it's never been able to achieve the kind of hockey stick growth that a lot of us aspire towards. Now, fast forward several years, at Simplilearn, we were faced with a very similar problem statement, which was this, right? And Simplilearn, the average selling prices are $15,000-$20,000 and above. And we again have strong gross margins, strong EBITDAs, and strong cash flows, everything. And unlike a lot of other, e-commerce unicorns in the country. But the problem statement again was very similar. The average selling price was $15,000-$20,000, which is pretty expensive in the Indian context. But the problem was, if I've just convinced Vanya to spend 15,000-20,000 rupees of her hard-earned money on say picking up a digital marketing certification, it's going to be a pretty difficult conversation for me to convince her to spend another 15,000-20,000 bucks in, you know, in learning another course or in picking up another certification. And again, we had very low repeats, and we solved this. However, in the previous case, we couldn't turn it around. It was a failure. Whereas in this particular case, as a player, we managed to turn things around by essentially pivoting the brand to take a positioning of saying, a positioning stance of saying that I am not just Vanya's training partner, but I am Vanya's career planner. Vanya, I'm not just selling a particular course to you, but I'm selling you the concept of a learning path. So Vanya's here at the base of this mountain. She wants to get to this peak. If she's on the marketing track, the peak is her aspirational chief marketing officer role, CMO role. Or if she's in the data science track, the chief data scientist role. No, she's here in base camp A. She completed one course. She needs to reach these three other, base camps B, C, E, B, C, D, and E before she reaches the summit, right? Which are 2-3 other courses. So I sold her the concept of a learning path. So essentially the brand was pivoted to that narrative, wherein we said we're not just in a transactional training partner relationship with our customers, but we are here to help customers plan their careers, and we are there as a learning partner and a learning guide for those customers. So we sold the concept of a learning path. If you think about it, there's nothing here, right? It's essentially a bundle program. It's a bundled offering that we're offering to our customers, right? We've just bundled 5 courses and we're offering to the customers, but we packaged it, as a learning path. And of course, there was intelligence built in. The learning path that was suggested to Vanya would have been different from the learning path and the combination of courses suggested to Biswajit. Each of them were customized, specific to the kind of career goals that Vanya and Biswajit had. And we targeted specific existing customers, right? And we had a lot of specific targeting efforts. Now, I know that Vanya has completed a course. She's 5 years experienced, whereas Biswajit is 15 years experience in the industry. He's a project management professional. What should I suggest? So the kind of suggestions coming through for Vanya and Biswajit would be very different. And we had a lot of these repeat in this context, drip communication efforts that went out. And what ended up happening was over 3 quarters, repeat revenue. Most of our revenue every single month was coming from new customer acquisitions. And over 3 successive quarters, because of all of this, almost 20% of our month-on-month revenue started coming in from repeat business from our existing customers. This was completely ground up incremental revenue, which came about because of all of these efforts. Now, we're almost down to the end of the session. Let's take a quick look at the various ways and means by which you can actually build, brand exposure for your business. Let's try and understand that with a simple example again. Let's say Vanya runs a company which has a Facebook page, right? Which has 100 followers. Her team makes a simple post. Let's assume all 100 of them end up seeing it. We know that organic reach on Facebook is not 100%. In fact, it goes down to 0 as you continue to grow. Mark Zuckerberg has gone on record stating this, which means that when you got 100 followers, you make a post, 80 of them might see it. When you've got 1,000 followers, you make a post, 600 of them might end up seeing it. When you got 10,000 followers, you make a post, 2,000 of them might end up seeing it. You guys can get where I'm going with this. But in this particular case, for simplicity's sake, let's assume all 100 end up seeing it. Now, the exposure that Vanya's brand has got to all of these 100 people is referred to as owned media. This is her own band of followers, right? Now, let's say Vanya, she's in a hurry to grow. She spends 10,000 bucks. It's not a one-on-one correlation, but just for simplicity's sake, let's say she gets exposure to 10,000 people. Now, these are not her own followers. She's got exposure to these people only because she's paid for it. It's paid media. Now, the third form of media creation, which unfortunately a lot of startups in India do not focus enough on, is referred to as earned media. And it is possibly the most powerful and the most credibility building form of media creation that can be possible, which is this, right? Let's say Vanya has not spent any money. She makes a post, but the post was so awesome that out of her 100 followers who saw it, 50 of them ended up resharing it. And each of them had 100 followers each, which created additional exposure to around 5,000 people, 50 multiplied by 100, which is the earned media that she has created for her brand because of the strength of her content. It's not her own followers, these 5,000 people. So it's not owned. It's not something she's paid for. It's not paid. It's something that she has earned. Her brand has earned through the strength of her content. Social media shares are a great way for you to create earned media for the brand. There are other ways as well. For example, PR is a great way. Let's say Vanya gets featured in an interview in the Economic Times. Right now, Economic Times' readership is not her own. It's not own media. It's not an advertisement that she has paid for. It's not an advertorial, but this is pure organic editorial coverage, right? And because this is again earned media exposure that she has got because of the strength of her brand. Another way is third-party discussion forums. Let's say there is a Quora thread with 10,000 views on where an entrepreneur is actually asking people, how do I choose the best possible payment gateway for my e-commerce website, for example? Or I don't know anything about programming, but I still want to use payments. How do I use it? Now, as a brand, Razorpay, I have the opportunity to inject myself into that conversation in a very non-salesy fashion and add value by providing information and adding value to that thread. Now, if I were to do that, I'm gaining access to all of those 10,000 views, which are not my own. It's not owned media. It's not paid media because I'm not paid for it. I'm not running ads on Quora, but it is something that I have earned through the strength and the intelligence of my intervention. Now, there are a lot of things that we've done for creating earned media for the brand. For example, we have run, for example, hashtag trending campaigns at Razorpay on the theme of unlock growth, hashtag unlock growth, where we try to crowdsource from the SME and the startup community out there. What are their mantras for actually unlocking growth in the post-pandemic new world order? At Healthify Me, for example, we have done, hashtag New Year resolution, because New Year is a time when people take health and fitness resolutions. We try to ask from them what are their health and fitness resolutions for the new year, and we've asked them to tag Healthify Me. In Simplilearn, we've had hashtag career wishes at the start of the year. Every year, what are your career wishes for the upcoming year, right? And if you're talking about social media shares and earned media, you're getting very close to the holy grail of marketing, which is on virality and creating viral content. Now, the term virality is highly abused, but I want to talk to you about a couple of different instances of virality that actually happened. One, of course, is Gangnam Style, which was a global viral phenomenon, but closer to home, it was the Koliveri D phenomenon. It was possibly almost a decade back now. It was possibly one of the first instances of something actually going viral, and it captured the imagination of the entire country and Indians living abroad, right? While a lot of us would have heard of the Koliveri D song, not a lot of us would be aware of some of the backroom workings that went into making Koliveri D the viral phenomenon that it actually became. Take a look at this video, which will give you a sense of that.
How much money do you think is required to make a song world super hit? 10 million? 20 million? We spent zero. Close the mouth. I'll tell you how. First, we shot the making of the song and then added subtitles for all the non-Tamilians. Then the most important, we added the collar ringback tone code for making some pocket money. We then put up the video on our YouTube channel and then seeded it on social media platforms, Facebook and Twitter. To get the audience watching and talking about our song, we created a hook, hashtag why this Koliveri D, which is a commonly used phrase in my state, Tamil Nadu, when somebody irritates you. Next 3 days, full tweeting different irritating situations with the hashtag why this Koliveri D, but we also added the link to our song with it. So people who could relate to that irritating situation clicked on the link, watched the song and forgot their irritation. They also understood the usage of the question, why this Koliveri D? And then they started tweeting about things which frustrated them with the hashtag and also added the link to our song. Basically, people love venting their frustration on social media, and we use this insight to get hashtag Koliveri trending on Twitter over 3 full days. Even people like Amitabh Bachchan ji and Anand Mahindra ji tweeted. The YouTube views kept on increasing. People were viewing, sharing. More than 41 million views across 220 countries. People love to ape a trend. So we put up a candid video of our own people singing the song in chorus, following which hundreds of people put in their own versions. Some even organized flash mobs, not just in India, even Netherlands and New Zealand. Oh, and by the way, the total collar ringback tones downloaded was 2 million and still counting. This brought us so much revenue that we are still counting actually. Okay, the enormous online buzz pushed even TV and print media to talk about the song. Articles were written on blogs, tabloids and even newspapers. It was featured in news channels and music channels. Every radio station in the country played Koliveri. In simple words, earned media is estimated to be more than 67 million rupees only. Money spent, zero. Mission accomplished.
That was an interesting one, and we can play a quick game of truth or dare. There's actually one thing that this person has said, which is the truth, and one thing that this person has said, which is not quite the truth. Any guesses on what they might be? You can put your responses in the chat window. The fact that they spent zero is actually not quite true. Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of people have said that, right? And I know this for a fact. And this is true for not just Kolaveri, but even for Gangnam Style, right? Even for other things that have gone viral, that it just doesn't happen through social media shares and earned media. There is a certain minimum amount of paid media investment that is made upfront to make sure that that piece of content gets that critical mass of eyeballs, critical mass of awareness. After which, of course, assuming that the content is inherently viral, earned media takes over and paid media can be shut off. And social media shares and the crowd take over. And but in this case, in Kolaveri case, they didn't spend it in overt, extremely obvious forms of advertising, quote unquote. They spent it very intelligently in seeding the content in specific communities, in influencer marketing, which was very subtle. So it didn't even appear to be paid media. Everybody thought it was organic. After some time, of course, earned media took over, and the content was, of course, inherently viral. And it caught on like wildfire, and you could even shut off paid marketing after a point, and the crowd took over. And earned media was much higher, several multiples of the paid media exposure that was created. And it's almost like a rocket that is looking to escape from Earth's gravitational pull, right? It needs to reach that minimum level of escape velocity before it can fly free. And that's how that's true for almost anything that goes actually viral. The thing that worked for them, of course, was the hook, the hashtag why this Kolaveri, which made their product relevant to the masses. That's all I had for you today. I hope this was useful, a constructive and a productive use of your time. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Would love to take any questions that might be there. I think Sanjay has a question. He has an application. I think, Sanjay, you need to employ the same framework that I had mentioned at the start, which is on ask yourself the category that you're operating in. Use Google Keyword Planner and figure out if the category that you're operating in is that mass or niche. In this particular, and if your mass, of course, you make Google your number one priority. If your niche, you make Facebook, high personal connect, etc. In this particular case, it doesn't seem like a category which is high on personal connect, right? It's a functional value prop that you're providing. In this particular case, and especially given the kind of growth that we have seen of the digital ecosystem and the growth of a lot of services marketplaces which are out there, I think this is something for which, if it's a mobile app, I would say you begin with making ASO and a combination of Google UAC campaigns as your first priority, followed by other channels. That will be my suggestion.
What is the UAC campaign, sir?
UAC is Universal App Campaign using the Google ecosystem. But to begin with, I would say you focus on Google search ads within the app ecosystem. Within UAC, you can focus on search as a network. Just focus on search. So when people are searching for keywords related to your category, how do I find a maid, or how do I find a maid online, or house cleaning services online, your ad should start showing up, right? Because your app is actually relevant. Make sure that you focus your efforts on the search network to begin with. Focus a lot on ASO, which is App Store optimization, right? Something that I mentioned, which is SEO's equivalent, but for app world, because you have a mobile app. Yours is an app only product, right? From your website, you can't do much, I assume. So focus a lot on ASO, like I had mentioned in the Healthify Me case, so that your app listing actually comes up on top for relevant keywords. And for doing mobile marketing, you would also need a strong mobile analytics tool. Google Analytics will not suffice. So if you can afford it, my suggestion would be purchase an App Annie. I'm just giving you the spelling here. This is something that I would recommend, Sanjay, for you to evaluate. I hope that helps you. Wish you all the best.
Thank you, sir.
Sure. Second question from Shubham is on how do you build a strong community in Facebook? I'm going to give you some tips, Shubham, which I think are can be used across the board. Community building is always hard. I know of my, one of my old friends who built a great community of pregnant mothers called Preg Buddy, which still is an app, but it essentially started off as a WhatsApp group. And then he also built a parallel community on Facebook before porting everybody on into the app. And the value prop there was very simple. The value prop was if you as a pregnant mother were to sign up, you're going to have an opportunity to interact with a lot of other like-minded pregnant moms who are going through what you are going through. So there would be a lot of groups around, say, South Bangalore pregnant mothers in trimester 2, South Delhi pregnant mothers in trimester 3. Salt Lake City, pregnant mothers, in trimester 1, for example. It also had something for pregnant dads, by the way. So it had an option, and all of these people, if you signed up in a group, obviously there was a validation process as well. You could, all the inertia, all the barriers actually came down, right? People are not self-conscious because they knew that they were amongst friends, and the kind of recency and the frequency of conversations which used to happen there, it was extremely high. And they started off, as I said, as a WhatsApp group. They then ported, and they also had a parallel Facebook group running, and then they ported everything into the app. And 2-3 mantras for building a strong community, Shubham. One is to make sure that your community is niche enough. It can't be very generic, right? And it needs to provide a lot of value to all of the people who are there, all the participants out there. Let's say I create a startup community today. It has no value. It means nothing. There are like 20,000 startup communities in the country. So I'm too late in the game. It's not going to add value. But for example, if I were to make it more niche, I talk about mompreneur startup community in Bangalore, for example. Right now, that is a lot more niche, and you'll have a lot of mompreneurs essentially, right? Stay-at-home moms who are also entrepreneurs. They would be wanting to, sign up and be a part of that community. Or if I were to create a community for entrepreneurs in India who are looking to sell to Northern Europe, for example, right? Who are exporters who are looking to sell to Northern Europe. That could be a particularly interesting niche. Now, there is something interesting for all of these people to bounce off one another. Now, these could be some angles for you to look at. And so one is make it niche enough. Obviously, you don't want to make it so niche that you've got only 10 people who qualify, right? But you've got to still make it niche, and so that it's value additive to the participants. Second one, make sure that at least in the early days, this is something that a lot of successful communities have done. They may not admit to it openly, but a lot of people do it. They inject moles into the community, right? These are people who, so if a community is created by a curator or a brand, if a brand is doing the talking, walls start coming up, right? People know that it is a brand which is talking to me and not another person of the community. So brands on purpose, they inject moles in the early days into the community just to seed and spark crowd conversation. So it looks more authentic, right? So I won't even know, for example, that Sanjay sir is a mole, for example, but Sanjay sir has been injected by the brand to spark conversations, for example. So that is another way. So during the early days, after some time, of course, the crowd organically starts participating, so you don't need the mole anymore. That is the second one. And the third one, make sure that there is enough value all of the participants are actually deriving from the community. In the PregBuddy case, all of these pregnant moms derived a lot of value. It was high churn because after 9 months, they would leave the platform. But you had a new bunch of these people actually entering the platform every, new people who had freshly gotten pregnant, they were actually entering the platform, which was very, very interesting. So make sure that it's differentiated niche. Make sure that during the early days, at least, you are able to spark organic, even if it is not completely organic, even if it is orchestrated conversations between individuals in the group, and make sure that the individuals are able to derive a lot of value. Yeah. Hope that helps you, Shubham. Wish you all the best. Sanjeev has a question on tools and how can we find if a campaign was monetized. Sanjeev, there are enough and more tools available. So if you're using Facebook, for example, Facebook's ad manager itself can give you a sense of which campaign is giving you what kind of ROI, etc. And because you have all of these pixels firing, they send information back. Let's say that I ran a Facebook campaign which drove 100 installs for you. It actually has the ability to track which of those installs actually bought a purchase plan from you, because you have Facebook pixels which are implemented. That when it fires, it sends information back into Facebook. And of course, you have your own good old fashioned Google Analytics, which you can use for actually tracking, app behavior, web behavior, monetization, etc., by various marketing channels and by campaigns. I hope that helps you, Sanjeev. Yes, feel free to connect with me. Have a pretty unique.
Sir, I would like to interrupt in between. I'm Sanjeev here, sir.
Yes.
Yeah, it was related to my question. I think I have not been able to give you the clear picture of what I was trying to find out. For example, I was asking whether a course that I would like to join for upgrading myself is actually a good course that people are buying or opting. So do I have a tool that so that I understand that, yes, this is a good enough, other than the normal, the feedbacks and everything? I'm not sure whether they might be correct or they might be, window dressed. So this is what I was thinking of.
That's an interesting one. I think apart from, I don't think there is a programmatic tool that is available which can essentially tell you, which is the course that will actually help you in your career. apart from ratings and reviews and the conversations that you can have in your own network. I think relying a lot on ratings and reviews will really help you. And having conversations with those people who have actually taken that particular course. Let's say you want to take a course from Simplilearn, for example, and you know 5 other people who have actually taken that course. Having authentic conversations with those people, I think that is something which will really help. Essentially doing your research about the brand upfront. And there are, of course, several blog sites that help you compare. So, for example, if you search for on Google, which is the best place, Simplilearn or Digital Vidya or Delhi School of Internet Marketing or Upgrad or Udacity or Unacademy or Byju's, which is Byju's is not relevant, it's for school kids, which is the most relevant program, then you'll have a bunch of different blog sites which will come up, which can give you a sense of which is the best one. And they actually give you ratings and they give you recommendations depending on your career path and the kind of experience and the exposure you have. I think you've got to look at a variety of different data points from all of these different angles to eventually make a decision.
Okay, thank you so much, sir.
Sure. Good luck, Sanjeev.
Thank you, sir.
Sure. And Sujata has a question. I'm just reading through her question. It's a long one. I think Sujata, yours is an interesting one. I actually have a different opinion here, Sujata, and this is again my own humble opinion. And I realize that I don't have as much business context as you do. But at least in my opinion, Facebook may not necessarily be your number one choice. I don't think it is something which has a very strong personal connect, at least in a country like India. I think you've got to look at possibly Google as your choice, because I'm this is a fairly massy space. It's not as though you would find limited keyword pools on Google. You would see a lot of relevant keywords that people are already searching for. So you need to make sure that you drive that inbound traffic on people who are already searching for specific keywords that are relevant. I'm sure there must be a lot of keywords around waste management, around how do I dispose waste in my community, in my building, etc. So tap into those moments of truth and look at monetizing Google. I'm not very sure if Facebook will actually work. People will just click through, but you may not get a lot of quality traffic via Facebook. Yeah, I hope that helps you, Sujata. Wish you all the best. It's an interesting one, Varatha. Varatha is saying if you start digital marketing, let's say she's starting digital marketing in a company which has no previous history of having run digital marketing. How do you convince management to continue spending? I think digital marketing, unlike traditional marketing, Varatha, has a lot of advantages. You can make changes in real time and you can start low. You don't necessarily need to spend 10 crores. You can start off with as low as 5,000 rupees and you can run campaigns in specific channels. And if you see it's not working out, unlike TV or radio campaigns where you've got to continue, the money is pre-committed, you can kill it right then and there. And the changes happen in real time. And you can slice and dice and figure out, let's say you have 10 campaigns running and you're spending 1 lakh, right? You can get to know which of 3 of these campaigns are not performing. You can kill them right there, but 7 of them are performing. You can reallocate funds. So using techniques like these, you can minimize chances of failure, right? And build confidence with higher management. Hope that helps you, Varatha. Wish you all the best. Gulshan has a question. Interesting. So 55 plus users, how do I target them? Senior citizens, it's always a little tricky. I think you can always look at Facebook. Facebook is really good when it comes to targeting senior citizens. I think in this particular case, chronic conditions, etc., strong personal connect. I think you can look at Facebook. Facebook would be a good channel for you to target. There would be some level of pilferage, wastage, which might still be happening because you may not necessarily be targeting relevant audiences. But for the most part, you should be, Facebook should work fairly well. Pratik has a question. Wish you all the best, Gulshan. Pratik has a question. B2B SaaS company. Okay, so he's running a SaaS company which provides offline payment solutions. How do we position yourselves? How do we position ourselves? That's an interesting one, Pratik. I'm not sure I know enough about your brand or your business.
Hi.
Hi, Pratik.
We are basically a B2B SaaS-based startup. We have come up with a solution which enables offline payment, which is not dependent on internet. It is basically towards the rural users. I mean, the digital divide which we saw recently due to the COVID pandemic. We saw postmen delivering cash directly into the hands of direct DBT beneficiaries, PMJDY account holders. We even saw state governments delivering cash into the hands of the needy, which is basically due to lack of internet. So we have come up with a solution which can act as a middleware catalyst, as a platform for the BFSI domain, which will enable the transactions to happen without any internet.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, Pratik. I think in this particular case, as part of your larger positioning strategy, you've got to make sure that think local vernacular will need to be a critical element. I think you've got to communicate in local vernacular, obviously. I think that is going to be very critical. And making sure that you clearly communicate that you are differentiated and different than UPI. I think that is also something which will be essential.
Yes.
I think that is something which will be very important. And I think for you to be able to reach your target customers, right, which are people living in rural India, there are again various ways to do it. I've heard this from a lot of entrepreneurs where they want to reach rural India. How do I use digital to actually reach rural India? Now, digital is not always the answer, right? You can still use Facebook and YouTube. A lot of rural India is on Facebook and YouTube, and you can still use it. But the problem is you might be bootstrapped. You may not have a lot of funds. There will be a lot of wastage in a lot of these channels. So what I would alternatively suggest is you don't look at digital. Digital doesn't have to be the answer always. Look at channel partnerships. So for example, work with other brands which are already having their tentacles and their networks spread across,
Yes.
the people in rural India. See if you can bundle your offerings with theirs. Either white label it or offer it, separately as a bundled offering, have some kind of a revenue share with these channel partners, and then take, go to market. To me, that is a much better way of going to market instead of trying to do it all by yourself. Digital does not always need to be the answer. Once you get some level of early traction, right, you get that initial set of early adopters, invest in building a very strong referral engine, word of mouth and referral engine. Right. I think that is something which will be very important. And over time, referrals itself can morph into something larger, wherein you create, follow essentially the Amway model, wherein you create champions for your product or service in every mohalla, every panchayat, every village, so to speak. Who's in charge? So I am in charge of selling this in my village, for example. I am your channel partner. I am your the Amway representative, right? Who essentially is your channel partner. So to begin with, you can look at a B2B channel partner because it's a chicken and egg problem, right? So for you to get some kind of scale, but once you get the initial set of early adopters, look at a combination of referrals and of course individual channel partners like the Amway model.
Okay.
Yeah, that will be my suggestion. I hope that helps. Wish you all the best, Pratik. Very interesting idea.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Sure. Moving on to the next question. Give me a moment. I think Purushottam has a question. What scenarios are to be considered going ahead of the payment gateway? Yeah, Purushottam has a question on what were the various factors to be considered when choosing a payment gateway. One of the biggest things is one of the biggest mantras I would suggest is don't just go by price, right? Regardless of whichever payment gateway you choose, the price is not going to be at max, it's going to be 2% in the Indian context. So if somebody gives it to you at 1.7, the 0.3% is not really going to make a difference. But what you should really be looking for is which is the payment gateway that can give you the best success rates. So your customers don't end up facing declines. Card declines, banking payment, banking declines, etc. That's a very bad experience. If somebody faces a decline, you probably lost that customer for life. So make sure that you choose the payment gateway which has the best success rate. Choose the payment gateway that gives you the widest choice of instruments for your end customers to pay from. For example, at Razorpay, we have the widest choice of instruments and the highest success rate, 100+ payment instruments. So which means your customers can pay using UPI, cards, net banking, EMI. Right? A lot of brands, a lot of payment gateways don't offer EMI options. Now, as a startup, as an SME, what is your problem? You're not Amazon, you're not Flipkart. You don't necessarily have the kind of credibility or trust in your customer psyche, right? So one great, when customers, you have to bridge that trust divide with your end customers. One of the great ways for you to do that is through providing EMI options, right? Which lowers the inertia barrier for entry for your end customers. So for example, make sure that your payment gateway provides EMI options. Subscriptions, right? They are again a great way for you to build stickiness. I spoke about repeat behavior, right? If you can have somebody, if I have say Pratik who signs up for a 1-year-long subscription, monthly subscription program, I have logged in Pratik for 1 year. Every month during that 1 year, I will auto debit either Pratik's bank account or card or UPI wallet. Right? Razorpay, for example, is one of the few ones which provide subscriptions on UPIs. So that essentially means that I have logged in Pratik as a customer for an entire year. So choose a payment gateway provider which provides you this variety of options, EMI, subscriptions across variety of instruments, success rate maximization, widest coverage of instruments. And of course, the other one is a native UX. You as an entrepreneur should have it should still look like my own website, right? I don't want the customer to feel Pratik is paying on my website. I don't want Pratik to feel that he's been redirected to some random third-party site. Right? The user experience and the look and feel of the payment gateway checkout page should look very close to my own website. So I should have the opportunity to customize it according to whatever I want. It's my payment gateway. It's my customer after all, right? So look at criteria like these, Purushottam. I hope that helps you. Namrata has a question. She's a manufacturer of gift items. I think mementos, people who want to, provide mementos to others. She has some traction there. She wants to enter the online platform as an aggregator of different. Okay, she wants to become a marketplace. How do I go about it? So Namrata, this is one of the first things that they tell anybody who's looking to build a marketplace. This is a question, right? It's a chicken and egg product. Should I get customers? Should I get suppliers? Should I work on demand or should I work on supply? But what all of the experts who build successful marketplaces say is that you've got to look at building supply first. Demand will always come. So focus on building enough supply of those people who are actually willing to sell gift items, and then you can drive demand. So focus on getting the supplier side first, which will not necessarily work through digital alone. It will require a lot of feet on street work, channel partnerships again, like I mentioned to Pradeep. Build the supply side, then work on building demand, which essentially will be through a bunch of different online marketing activities. I would imagine to begin with, it would be Google, because this is a fairly massy space that you're getting into. So Google would be your first choice, followed by some of the other places. Potentially Facebook can also work. You can spin it and still say, gifts for specific, say Raksha Bandhan, etc. It has a strong emotional appeal in our country. So you can still spin it, but it's a highly competitive space. So what I would do is start off with building supply, and then look at building demand. I hope that helps you, Namrata. Wish you all the best. Any other questions?
Veda, are you available on LinkedIn?
Yeah. As I said, Pratik, I have a pretty unique name, Vedanarayanan Vedantam. You can find me easily on LinkedIn.
Sure. I'll get in touch with you.
Sure. Happy. Look forward. I think there's one more question. We'll take one last question. Vaidehi has a question. Best e-commerce hosting platform for India. That's an interesting one. I think GoDaddy is as good as it gets. I think which provides you multiple things, right? It provides you cloud hosting. It provides you domain name services, helps. And of course, it also provides you an e-commerce storefront building capability. All of that combined into one. So that at least would be my recommendation, Vaidehi. I hope that helps you. Back to you, Vanya. Thank you so much.
Hey, thank you so much, Veda. I think I've enjoyed the past 1.5 hours being in the shoes of an entrepreneur, a doctor, everything. So I think it's been such a lovely session, and it clearly shows like the diverse kind of knowledge that you have in every domain. So thank you so much for coming in and sharing that with us. We'd be, happy to have you on more sessions like this, maybe a deep dive into some of the problems that the startups mentioned, and so on and so forth. So I'll stay in touch with you for that, and thank you so much for your time today.
Sure. Thank you so much for the opportunity, Vanya. Thanks for having me over. Thank you to Head Start Foundation again, and a big thank you to all of the people who stayed back on a Saturday evening. Wish you all good health, stay safe, and take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, guys. I would urge you to quickly give your feedback for the session. What would you like to have in the subsequent coming sessions? More than happy to take that. So yeah, that's it.
Cool.
Thanks, Peter. Thank you for your time. Bye-bye.
Stay safe. Bye.